Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Joint AWS and HashiCorp webinar, where today our topic is unlocking the cloud operating model on AWS. So I am Vincent Arnaud, your EMEA Cloud Channel Manager, and here at HashiCorp, and I will be your moderator for this session. So welcome everyone. I am pleased to introduce you to excellent speakers. We will firstly introduce Brent Holden. Brent, if you want to say a word, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Vincent. So my name is Brent Holden. I'm the Global Field CTO here at HashiCorp. My job is to talk about what our technology vision and strategy is, as well as interacting with our product and marketing teams to understand the customer problems, how we're solving them, and what we're doing going forward. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. And we have Tony on the line, Tony Whitehill. Hello, Tony.
Hi, how's it going?
All good. Thank you for being with us. I give you one minute to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm happy to be here, guys. My name is Tony Whitehill. I'm a solutions architect at AWS. I primarily focus on working with HashiCorp and the HashiCorp team. Great group of people, awesome team to work with. We're going to be sharing some stuff that we're doing together here today with you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Glad to have you too. So in terms of agenda, what we will cover today. So we'll spend some time talking about how HashiCorp and AWS help customers transform their infrastructure. We'll go on the notion of what is the cloud operating model and how it's been implemented into the cloud adoption framework, AWS Cloud Adoption Framework. We will have a look to some EMEA references, and we'll cover some lesson learned. And at the end of this session, we will have some time for Q&A. So on that note, please do not hesitate to use the Q&A button into this webinar, and we will cover your question at the end of the webinar, and we will give 10 minutes for question. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we send that out to you by email after it's been processed. Usually it takes 1 or 2 days. So with that, over to you, Tony, and have a great webinar.
All right. Thanks, all. So to get started, I just wanted to kind of set the stage here and just say that AWS and HashiCorp work together, on many different engineering feats, and also a different, planning events around both if you're familiar with the cloud operating model and the CAF itself. We're gonna try to kind of merge those together and talk about how they work together. We have recently, did some pretty innovative things when it comes to working with things like automation patterns, like landing zones. So we'll talk about that a little bit and what the value that brings to the customer is. Terraform just had a major release, so that was pretty exciting for us to be able to work together on that and continue that focus on engineering. So we are basically, going to sit here and discuss in a kind of a dialogue manner with you about how we work together, how we bring value to each other, and how that proliferates to you guys.
Yeah, Tony, I agree. Like things like Terraform landing zones, that actually started as an effort by the AWS services team to help standardize how AWS accounts get created and automated for their customers using self-service. So that was a joint effort to create that automation pattern. And then for something like HashiCorp Cloud, I know that's going to be a newer term for a lot of people in the audience. For HCP, it's more like a way for HashiCorp to deploy and operate some of our service for you. So Consul is our first service being offered. I'm actually super excited. It's going to land on AWS first. And that, I'm not going to say it's the future of the company. I think the products are always going to be, kind of as they are. But in terms of how, we're addressing customer demand, customers have demanded, an easier operational experience from us for a long time. We're excited to partner with AWS over it.
Awesome.
So Tony, why don't you go ahead, maybe talk about some of the shifts you're seeing? I'm happy to add some color commentary to that.
Sure. Yeah. So, um, at this point, we're seeing massive onboarding through the HashiCorp tool set into AWS. Some of these shifts are obvious. We'll cover that. The other ones are maybe less obvious, but really pertinent to our conversation here, and also the challenges that come along with that. So some of that is going to be detailed here in our chat here, but really how all these natural things that happen as you move from data centers or other environments into the cloud. Some things just doesn't look like another data center. There's just some unique challenges that both AWS and HashiCorp really solve pretty elegantly together. So we'll touch on that as we go. I'll kind of let Brent maybe give a little more details on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just like you said, that, I mean, the shift to cloud is, especially with AWS, is going to be an obvious one for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of shifts going on. It's not necessarily just the technology shifts, but there's also a lot of less obvious shifts related to people, process, things like that,
Yeah.
I just got off an executive briefing today, and, one of the key pieces of information they talked about was people is one of the hardest problems to solve. And so, we'll talk through that in just a couple more minutes. So let's first talk about what those obvious changes are. And so some of the more obvious changes that we see are that, you're adding providers like AWS as part of your infrastructure. That's a pretty obvious one that's going on. If you're on this, this webinar, you've already seen it in action. And the thing is that we don't necessarily see the private data center going away. So I think most companies are trying to articulate it as private cloud, but I think it's where they're augmenting capabilities and then shifting workloads over to AWS for both the purposes of agility to move faster. They want to gain more efficiency. They want to improve their processes, observability. All of those things are capabilities that AWS offers. I think it's really centered around application delivery. I don't know, Tony, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The way that we work together on this is pretty much a natural kind of thing. So we AWS are focused on self-delivery, mechanisms that really provide services to the end user as quickly and as easy and as self-service as possible. Hashi's tools really dovetail that effect and provide guidance and things like that you might not naturally think about as you enter it, because maybe you're used to just bouncing between data centers and things like that. So the tool sets that I've come to know and love very well, and so as many of our mutual customers, really just are kind of developed for this journey in a lot of ways, I feel. And they're naturally moving from I think the methodology there is moving from a static to dynamic component. The tooling has to change in order for that shift to happen. And some of the things we'll touch on how that is supported.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, especially when you talk about the shift to dynamic. A lot of customers started with just trying a lift and shift type procedure, almost treating like AWS as an off-premise VMware. And the challenge with that is that, within the modern data center, you just have challenges that you're going to have some dynamicism, right? We have availability zones. We have these different sort of constructs to deal with sort of coping with the failure domain. And based on that, having the same sorts of approach that we had to dedicated on-prem infrastructure just doesn't necessarily work. And part of that change in approach is our process.
Right. And some of that I think is difficult for some customers that are actually traditionally used to VMs, and that and they're experts in that, right? So they're doing that forever, and they're really good at it. Thinking about that from an API perspective, it's just kind of a different model and a different shift. So introducing tools that that help in that transition is is what we're here to do. Actually, what we're here to talk about. Because without them, you might get into that click ops thing, like we'll talk about later today, which is probably not the right way to approach the cloud, right?
Man, that's ClickOps is a great way to put it. I think when you talk about the multi-step app delivery that most companies have, I mean, we sort of cite this. I'm not going to reference their name. It's a little embarrassing. But I just think like the way that we always did work was we'd have a technology owner, we put a ticket queue in front of them, and then whenever people want those resources, they file a ticket, right? And so over time, as you add more technologies, now you have this 70 something step process that takes over 10 months. And, when you start talking about like expanding applications, well, now like security is no longer a checkbox in the end, it has to be integrated. Same thing with networking. And, what that yields is that it just makes it really difficult to sort of extract what is that time to value, right? That's really the thing that people want, is focusing on how quickly can we deploy applications, how agile can we be. The traditional way of approaching that problem is just really cumbersome. And so that's really what DevOps is all about, is just accelerating agility and making people more self-sufficient, right, with the platform. I think Tony, I'd love some of your thoughts here, because what we see is really around, I think most people that I talk to, they think of it in terms of, tools first, and then they layer, tooling can be kind of it's a difficult discussion to have because people get very sort of addicted to their tools. And,
especially the engineering layer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, having been somebody that has done this forever, I'm pretty comfortable with my tools, and I want to, continue to use them. So the more familiar you are with something, you try to take that tool and map it to the new thing that you're doing, which, most engineers will find out it's a different problem. So the people's, the people problem there is not the people themselves. It's just, there's definitely a new skill component there. And then, the structure of the teams is also another thing. Usually when you're dealing with verticals or data center methodology, or just, VM methodology, even, you're not really in a self-service sort of model. You're in a, networking, storage, compute model usually, or a plan, build, run model, which, the model changes with the cloud. It's almost like it's a DevOps model. So you take it from start to beginning. So the tooling and the systems, the processes all adapt with that. So I've seen that to be a very common thing as a first kind of bump or shift.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about like how lift and shift just is not the preferred approach of most companies I talk to. So as they're rethinking that approach, instead of focusing on the tooling, like how do we just import workloads, it's more about how do we make it easier for people to land new workloads onto AWS as a platform, right? So changing their processes, just like you said, reorganizing their teams. I think a lot of the new teams I see organized, they call them T-shaped, right? Where they still have those technology experts. You always get, if you're adopting AWS, you want to have those AWS experts on hand. But it's also people focused on what is the process, what is the workflow, and then keeping in mind like self-service is really the goal for a lot of these things, right? So organizing around people, making it easier for them to do work, I think is a key point. Okay. Now the challenge is like when you talk to most executives, they have like the big bang approach of, hey, we're adopting cloud and DevOps. And then they'll follow that right up with like, just don't break anything, right? Because most IT departments, they're gold on business continuity, right? So uptime, reliability, stability, those are all the kind of abilities they usually care about. And it's really about, allocating time when you're talking about learning new skills and changing process. You really do have to allocate time to it. That's an important detail as well. All right, so I mean, I think that the cloud operating model, it really is, and Tony, I'd love to hear like your opinion on like how it interacts with the cloud adoption framework. I think the cloud operating model really is about shifting processes around how do we deliver applications? What are the tools that support these, like the new API-driven approach? And then how do we reskill people along with that? What do you think? How does that interface with the cloud adoption framework?
So the cloud adoption framework, I think, was some guidance that we put out there to just guide IT CTOs, managers, architects, everyone into just thinking about things in kind of compartmentalized areas. There's really 6 key areas there that are mapped in that process. Business, governance, people, platform, operations, and security. And while those things are fairly, they're self-explanatory in some ways what those fits in, but some of the things that you would think like, what does people really have to do with it? How does the operations role map to that? And for us, depending on the task that you're doing and the way your organization's shaped, some of those things overlap, some of those things can be combined, but you still have to have focus in all those 6 areas. I think the way that it maps to the COM model or the cloud operating model is, I feel like it's a very good model to operationalize those concepts.
Yeah,
and how do I
definitely.
actually provide the guidance and provide that security, have repeatable operations tasks. COM really details that out as how to actually do it, right? So the CAF is more of a guideline in my eyes, and the COM is
Yep.
more of a how do I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the COM really talks about, where do we focus on when it comes to like, where do people meet the process? It really does focus more on that workflow. I think most people know HashiCorp for the tools, right? We just talked about like how most operators and practitioners, they're going to focus on the tools layer. It's really more about thinking through, okay, like Terraform is a great tool for, scripting automation. I think everyone knows that. But I think it's more about how do we think about the workflow of people who want to deploy applications? How do we make it easier for them to create things that are repeatable? And then how do we scale that process across an entire organization? To me, that's what the COM is about. Fits perfectly with the adoption framework.
Agree.
So I think I can talk through some of this. I think this is a lot to do with the specific products that we ship. Part of the journey is a process journey, right? So thinking about how do we provide self-service API-driven access to things like Amazon or our legacy infrastructure, so that way we can adopt a common approach to how we deploy infrastructure for applications. I think over time, what we also see is that each of the technologies has a crawl, walk, run. Usually most customers, when I talk to them, they might start off with Terraform or Vault, could really be either or. And they start off with the basics of how each technology was built. Secrets management, infrastructure as code. And then what they start doing is, as they're adopting these things as a centralized shared service, offering things like compliance, governance, on top of that to sort of provide guardrails for people consuming it. Tony, has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, so it definitely is a different speed, as the way I'd put it. So the crawl, walk, run model, or in this case, we mapped it here as establish, standardize, and innovate on different things on what you're doing. The time frame, I think, when you're dealing with the cloud between crawling and walking, it start to be like very small, because you have that self-service engine behind you that really can just go at the speed that you're going. Depending on your walking pace, you might be actually running, right? Which can get you into some interesting challenges because of the speed that you're getting to, because you might have skipped over standardizing a little bit, which is something I've seen. And where the products that we have here on Terraform, Vault, Console, Nomad fit in. There's also I found from the AWS side, there's no real like entry point that has to be one versus the other. Customers tend to pick what their struggle is, or what they're trying to tackle at that moment, and they come across Hashi's tool set, and they say, my big problem is actually secrets management. That's my core key thing that I must absolutely get right before I do any sort of running or walking, for that fact. Really, so that establishing that trust domain with Vault is something that I think Hashi personally has done really well. It's an awesome tool, and I see a lot of entry for cloud customers that may already have been consuming AWS. When they hit the HashiCorp layer, they're at the Vault layer, and others are more traditional in the sense that they've come from some sort of scripting back product or deployment product, and they see Terraform and just fall in love with it because it's uniquely, I think, targeted to the challenges that you don't expect that it solves. Meaning, like when you have data centers, you don't really have a concept of state in those data centers typically. Terraform with the cloud, that's absolutely a critical component, and Terraform naturally kind of brings you to that, and brings that to the forefront, lets you think about it, and i.e. helps you standardize in that realm, and then gets to your innovation stage. So that's kind of, I guess, what I would say in this journey, how I see the tools coming in.
Yeah, totally agree. I think also another sort of another way of looking at it from just a different perspective, relating it back to the process, is that for each one of these, this is basically like a use case map of each of the products, and where we see customers in their adoption. And if you look at each one of these uses of it, it's more or less removing a ticket queue from the workflow, and it's providing self-service around that specific use, right? So instead of requesting a DNS name to be created, you can just use console to automatically register a DNS name. The next phase of that is really around driving automation around firewalls and load balancers, right? That's what we mean by network middleware automation. So same thing goes true for Terraform and its journey with policy as code. That just removes a human check from your global risk and compliance group to say, okay, well, instead of having a human look at it, you can just apply policy. That way it removes like the human check, the ticket that has to go in, and you're on your way to providing self-service. So I look at each one of these as a way to just remove another ticket queue and focus more on the workflow. Okay, so Tony, why don't you go ahead? This is right in your wheelhouse. Would you talk through like some of the cloud adoption framework and how it meshes in?
Right. Instead of kind of stepping through the cloud adoption framework and its genericness, I think if we focus on how it maps into the journey is really where you start to get into finding the need to from migrating in to the cloud, then operating it, and then how do you actually go from that to a sustainable, repeatable model where you're optimizing on cost, where you're optimizing on agility, and also you start thinking about how do I structure this long term. So in this framework, again, stepping away from the concepts, which are it's a great white paper to read, and thinking about how to operationalize it, I'll probably focus on a few things that I think maybe isn't as obvious, and that would be you have an account management component that comes in pretty much right away, right? You have a larger account. How do you make sure that those accounts will be manageable? And something that we co-engineered and created together is a great pattern for actually solving that, which is Terraform Landing Zone. And Terraform Landing Zone just pretty much brings that here's my problems and here's a toolkit that I can actually use to solve that problem. So essentially, it'll take you to the next step very quickly and very easily. The other thing that, as I think through this, as you adopt into the cloud, you start getting into, well, now I'm running at the speed of self-service, and maybe most of my engineering team or development team is coming from the open source background and using Terraform. They have familiarity there, so which is awesome because you actually are skilled up and you can get going real quick. But from a larger, from a kind of CTO layer, you want to make sure that there are guardrails there. in this as you start that, as you operate and move in. So, I think things like Sentinel, a supernatural fit, supernatural fit, not a supernatural fit, but it's a natural fit to solving those problems, right? And policy as code, I think, initially when I thought of it, it's just felt so obvious, but the fact that it wasn't really done before just blew my mind. And I think it's something that, as customers look at adopting the cloud, they'll find that it's a crucial step. Without it, you're actually, hitting a fairly high level of risk in certain areas. So Sentinel's a good point to talk about in these kind of journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sentinel, most people, I did too, when you think about policy as code framework, it's more about, what types of machines can you run, or where can you run them, what sort of region, things that Sentinel can also do, or like things like cost analysis, right? So
Exactly.
you can give like a cost center within IT, you can give them a bucket of money or a bucket of funds and say, okay, well, how many thousands of euros per month, and as they're doing their plan, they can actually see how much it's going to cost them, or at least an estimated value. That's pretty cool. You talk about optimizing for cost in AWS. It's important to a lot of AWS customers.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say, just to touch on that a little more, is, you're moving away from kind of a sysadmin role to a development role. So most of the core practitioners are going to have a development background, most likely, as you shift in like super deeply. Or that sysadmin's going to start doing more and more development work, which is just natural. It just happens. But I'll be frank. It's just that it's not that the engineers don't want to read, because they read all the time. I read all the time about different technology things and things like that. But when there's a document there that says, here's my policy, here's what you can and cannot do, here's why, here's the cost, here's just all this business logic behind it. You skim through it, but you're not going to maybe remember what machine type you're supposed to not use or use all the time. So having, Sentinel there just basically giving you kind of an API response back to your workflow, you're really not even leaving your terminal, you're leaving your IDE environment, and you're getting a message back saying, oh, hey, you left the CIDR block open, or you left, you have the security thing you hit. And it's just a lot more of a natural self-correction for myself when I feel that, rather than getting a ticket, like you mentioned earlier, having a ticket inserted into that workflow, which is awful for everybody, right? Somebody's getting paged. All those things can be avoided by kind of moving to a policy model. So
I think I might add, like, the one anecdote around policy as code is that we worked with one financial services company based over in the UK, and the engine was co-engineered with them. And the reason why is because when they adopted Terraform, they started offering, self-service API-driven access for infrastructure, using infrastructure as code. And they found that there was a huge amount of uptick in usage. But what they also found is, like, their costs started, accelerating. And so what they did was they made basically every request stop and have to be reviewed by a human. Well, as it turns out, like, for the entire bank, there was only 5 of those people who could do that, right? And so, sort of like I said, like, each different use case sort of removes a ticket from the queue. The policy as code engine just removes that human from reviewing all of those things, whether it's cost or sort of resource alignment or restrictions. But we can do that in an automated way. Super important. Okay, so let's talk about, like, sort of what some of the the best practices are. I think I guess I'll take the first one. For executive sponsorship, for me, having an executive who buys in, especially when you're talking about an organizational type change, like a process change, you can't get away without it. You need an executive to sort of sign off on it and to be your champion, because a lot of times you just have to recognize there's going to be a different way of doing work. And if you're engineering things without that executive sponsorship, it's pretty common that if you don't have it, they end up going nowhere. So it's really important to have that.
Right. So, from I absolutely agree. Executive sponsorship is a key element in getting this right. And you know, that decision point shouldn't be taken lightly. It's something that, you know, you have to understand well. And what I would say is, if I was to talk to, you know, that layer, that executive layer, and say,
Yep.
you know, why would I pick HashiCorp and AWS to work together? One is we work together very often, and we usually do that in most cases, I'd say almost 100% of the time on the behalf of a mutual customer. So the struggles that customer, or the plans that customer has to either scale or do something that is, you know, not traditional, meaning like they're going big on something, and both of us need to step up and really help the customer to get there, is
Right.
one, exciting, and two, it's something that we've done together in many areas. Once you know, so us having that ability, and I can totally honestly say that, it leads me to, you know, saying the executive sponsorship there, you know, when it comes to tooling, that you narrow it down into that discussion, you have to standardize, and you have to but yet let the development layer and the engineering layer, you know, have as much openness, but with kind of controls that they don't feel like they have. Right. So you want to keep that self-service model. You want to keep that agility. You want to keep that fast-moving development train just always going as fast as possibly can, but you don't want it to go off the rails, and you don't want to have a crash. So in order to do that, you have to put in practice a good framework, and then let, you know, the train go as fast as it's engineered to go, if you will. So, you know, in this, if you think about, you know, the other common thing that I see in this is that sometimes the engineers get more of that say, and then it funnels upward. I think it's better when it goes the other way. The reason why I say that is it's just natural for someone like myself to get hooked on something that I know, and kind of not pay attention to, you know, do I really need to be doing this? Because it's kind of nerdy and I want to do it, right? That's not really a good business principle to map to, because just because I like it doesn't mean the company actually needs me to do that, right? Secrets management is actually a great part of that. Secrets management, you know, is something that is it has to translate between people. So if you have, let's say, you know, core really awesome development team that's created this really, you know, a secrets management system that works well, that's awesome. But what happens when people move in and out of that team, leave the company, et cetera? You're left with this really core component that is too customized and super hard to understand.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
so Vault is something that would save you from that, right? And really let you focus on other parts of that innovation curve.
Yeah, definitely. So executive sponsorship is absolutely necessary. You talked in terms of like skills, right? So technology is one, the skills necessary to sort of use them. You know, adopting these tools, like it takes like time and effort to investigate. It's kind of like the joke, the cartoon at the bottom, right? Is that like, I could offer you the best tool, but like, if you don't allocate time for it, if your executive doesn't buy into it, you're just not going to have time to look at it, right? So part of it is you just got to allocate time, you know, to investigate the tools. You also have to allocate time to figuring out what do you want that process to look like. We look at ticket-based processes as that should be the exception, not the norm, if you want to focus on automation and that self-service delivery. I think the last thing on here, and you touched on it as well, you know, creating sort of the pie in the sky project. It's the projects that don't really have a clear alignment to any sort of business group. Now, some of that is driven by an executive, right, who says, hey, we're going to partner with this particular BU. But like you said, the engineers sometimes, like, they get enamored with tools and they say, hey, we're going to just build something around this tool without really thinking through what is the business level impact of the things that we're creating, right? And I think that's probably like one of the most important takeaways, is that the things you create, like process and that change, it speaks directly to agility and your ability to speed the time to value and speed the application release process. That has a direct alignment with a lot of business groups and their goals in the market. Right.
Brent, Tony, your moderator speaking. Cautious of time, we have probably 3-4 minutes to conclude. So maybe we can go to the reference slides, and then we can connect and have some Q&A if you're
Terrific. Yeah, I love the idea. If anyone has any questions from the audience, Tony and I would be more than happy to address them. I think
we have some question already in the Q&A.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So I think Tony, we can wrap up the. We can just talk briefly about this, and we talk about some of the references. Just for for this stuff, talking through phase 1, 2, 3. I think just like we talked about earlier, there's sort of a crawl, walk, run for most customers. I think most customers start with, this is actually more of like not necessarily about the tool, but about an application deployment approach. We talk about ClickOps. That's where most customers sort of exist. There's a ticket that comes in. They have a runbook that defines how they do their work, and then it's just point and click through the GUI and just get it done. Right? It's slow. It's cumbersome. And it usually means that you have this daisy chain of tickets that you have to work through. Second phase. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm saying, I think we've actually covered these phases in the chat that we've had, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ClickOps phase 2 is thinking about, how do I not bottleneck myself or stifle my growth in a way. And then 3 is how to get there, really. You want to get away from phase 1 as quick as possible, obviously.
Yeah.
That's where everybody starts, and you want to, try to not spend too much time there.
Absolutely, right. So phase 1 is like the cumbersome approach. Phase 2 is the automated approach. Phase 3 is the repeated automation approach, right? So it focuses more on the repeatability. So we see customers go through that every day. I think sort of looking at like the last sort of section that we have, there's really, a lot of references that HashiCorp has. They're all on HashiCorp.com. Specific to the continent, there's a few that we have that are huge. Unfortunately, we can't reference them by name. One's a very large Spanish bank. You've definitely heard of them. And it really is for them about that time to market, really the software development speed. And we want to, they had the #1 goal of accelerating that. And so their whole push was working with us and Amazon to then create a CI/CD pipeline that delivered infrastructure directly to AWS resources using Terraform Enterprise. The second is a very large service provider based in the UK. And I'm not going to like sort of read off the slide because I know we're a little short on time. We want to leave time for questions. But I think it's more about how do we then take that story of then deploying resources and add the compliance component along with it, right? That was really important to them, critical part of their journey. The last one, Tony, is exactly what you talked about with just the secrets management side of it, like improving that hygiene is, that was what it was all about, taking off-prem resources in AWS and just, making it that it was more securely deployed.
Yeah.
Okay. We're close to the end here. I think there's a lot of customer success. You'll see these across both companies. Tony, I don't know if you want to add anything.
This last slide, these support, technical, management, professional services, and the consulting layer. There, we have that layer, pretty much across all of our services and across, our accounts. And I think Hashi's model is pretty much well in line with ours. So if you're used to, having 24/7 support and a TAM as part of your account, you're really going to get that same mapping from HashiCorp, which is, I think, nice that customers can enter and know which one to drop into for the given task that they're doing and they're trying to achieve. So it's nice that we're both in line there. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, totally. And I think, honestly, there's so much more to talk through, right?
Sure.
If for people who are like looking at this over the web, which assumably you are, nobody's in person, we do have a lot of things that we can follow up with. I think there's a lot of ways that AWS works together. We have videos, demos, white papers. Go to either the white papers that HashiCorp has created, on our cloud partners page, or there's several on the AWS landing page, which we can send as a follow-up that are included below. The AWS modules, AWS, the EKS Getting Started Guide, those are all published on AWS.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Brent and Tony. As mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, so you will receive some more information and the link to the recording via email in the coming days. Maybe it's time for now to ask some questions. And I got some question for you guys. Maybe starting with Terraform Landing Zone. Maybe for you, Tony. How can I benefit from AWS HashiCorp Terraform Landing Zone? I have some landing zone scripts available in the implementation guide. Is there a Terraform Landing Zone script available in the implementation guide as well?
So if you look at landing zones and Terraform landing zones, AWS landing zones, they're doing essentially a similar task. Really, what's nice about using landing zone or Terraform landing zone is if you're planning on having expertise built in an area of your engineering department, you're pretty much learning one tool, and you're doing the same task to manage everything from that one layer. There's also a dovetailing effect from not just deploying multiple accounts and kind of setting that up. It goes further, like now you're deploying into those accounts, right? So it's nice to have one tool, I would say, to kind of go from start to finish there. That's really what I think is the benefit. Other than that, it's just what your model is.
I think, so I'd like to add on to that. I'll cheat a little bit because Brett Henkel from AWS, he presented at HashiConf last September, exactly about Terraform landing zones, kind of what was the difference. Some things that Brad talked through were that, so the goal of the Terraform landing zone is to have like an AWS vending machine, like an account vending machine. That's the whole point. But why they selected Terraform to help do that is because Terraform makes it really easy to add in third-party integrations. So for example, if you wanted to spin up an account and then call out to a third-party tool to do a security scan, that's a really easy thing to integrate. Whereas it's just not as easy with the concept of the AWS landing zone. The integrations aren't there.
That's a great point. Yep.
The other reason that Brad cited, which I think is worth mentioning, is that exactly what we were talking about with policy as code. They can apply policy consistently as accounts get created. So there's certain, like, for example, like IAM policies that get applied when accounts get created, and they can enforce that via policy as code. It's those types of things, I think, that sort of push the AWS team to start leveraging those. I think I'll answer, I see another question, the Q&A, I'll sort of skip ahead. That work, as far as I know, is not yet public. They are working on making it public. It's effectively run through by the AWS services team. There is a joint effort to make that work public now in a more generally consumable way.
Yeah, thank you, Brent, Tony, for this answer. Maybe another question, maybe for you, Brent. Are you planning to provide HashiCorp solution to a SaaS platform?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. It's one of my favorites I've gotten lately. So I think like what we talked about earlier was HCP, the HashiCorp Cloud Platform. That is effectively a SaaS platform for HashiCorp products. So if you wanted to, as a customer, say, I want Vault, but also in the back of your mind, you don't want to operate it and deal with the operational burdens that come along with it. The goal is to have you go to the HashiCorp Cloud Platform page. If you're an AWS customer, you say, I want Vault deployed into AWS, and we will deploy it into an account that we manage that is isolated, and all you have to do is just peer with it, right? So we operate it. We take all the, the bricks out of the briefcase, so to speak, to use like US colloquialism. We just make it easier by reducing the operational burden. So that is the future, where we've announced HCP with console on top of AWS, and there's a very good announcement that'll be that'll be released or reinforcing that. The the other thing is that all of the products have a roadmap for getting there. So whether it's starting with Console, then Vault, eventually Terraform and Nomad as well, it should just be a service where you say, hey, I want this on top of AWS, and we'll just provision it for you. We operate it for you, and then it's just metered billing. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for this. Yeah, interesting. So more is coming, and this is definitely the plan.
Yep.
Maybe a last question. Interesting one. Are HashiCorp solution embedded into AWS Marketplace? Maybe for you, Tony?
Yeah. So yes, there are a few there that that Marketplace offers. But it's not the only way to consume resources on AWS. I would say, really, all the marketplace, consuming something through the marketplaces versus not, really has to do with the business side of the house. There's usually a natural driver to consume it in one way or another. The other thing is, like as Brent mentioned, we together deliver many different models of kind of providing these tools. So I mean, you have to think about using Marketplace in one thing. Am I just consuming the tool? Do I just want to have the binaries to something? Sure. There's a second step there. I also want to make Vault HA and make sure that layer is built out. One, I need to understand it, or I'm using the SaaS. So if I'm using the SaaS model, then great. I just deal with the secrets management. If I'm using it, if I'm deploying it myself into an account, then I want to understand how it's deployed and how it's architected. We commonly see that. So to provide kind of guidance to the user or end user, mutual customer, we have references in many different types of references, actually. Quick starts that deploy it in there. If you're using EKS or other models, that might not be something that you do through Marketplace. You might just you have an existing Kubernetes cluster or EKS that you're using. We have references that will actually drop Vault in very natively, right? So we do have them, but we don't just follow that model. There's lots of different ways to get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Brent, you wanted to add something? I think we need to close now the call. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Tony, for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good
chatting with you, Brent.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
So you will receive an email with the link if you're interested and if you want to forward it. And it was a pleasure to have you guys here, and talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.